In this video, we're going to discuss whether naming Wings as the best picture was a successful call or if other movies were snubbed. People decide this through a variety of ways. We are going to be doing it by watching other major films that came out that same year, or in this case, year and a half. The eligibility period for the first Academy Award stretched from January of 1927 to the end of May of 1928, so anything from that time goes. To start things off, I do have to take a look at Fritz Lang's Metropolis, a German film that deals with class warfare and is considered one of the early landmarks of the science fiction genre, as well as one of the staples of the Bauhaus art design that dominated the 1920s. The film takes place in a mechanized city and centers on the looming war between the poor working class and the rich upper class. Considering how this film was made in Germany in the 1920s when their economy was this divided, it was a nice little cautionary tale. The production design for this movie is unbelievable, and it still holds up. Throughout the whole film, you honestly believe that you're in this city. In addition, the villain Rotwang, played by Rudolf Klein-Rogge, is probably one of the earliest examples and influences of the mad scientist archetype. Despite these praises, however, the film was criticized at its release for being very difficult to follow, and yeah, that's still kind of a big problem with it today. Also, the fact that it was from Germany meant that the Academy was more likely to ignore it, but that's something we'll talk about in another video. One of the other big films that year was Charlie Chaplin's classic, The Circus. The film is what it implies. Chaplin's character, the Tramp, accidentally joins the circus and gets into all sorts of hijinks, which makes him a huge hit with the audience. Unfortunately, however, he can only be funny by accident. This setup leads to a lot of great bits. When this movie came out, it was a very big deal since it went through a lot of production problems and took a good 3 years to make. Well, that's nothing unusual these days. Back then, it was unheard of. And as we all know, the longer something is delayed, the bigger people's expectations will be. And this film did not disappoint. People adored it. This is a movie that I actually recommend you watch if you get the chance, because it's still a great comedy. It follows the Tramp through a nice little character arc and has some good moments of drama to balance out the humor. On top of that, it's still pretty dang funny. Another major film that got its wide release in 1927 was Buster Keaton's silent comedy epic, The General. Set against the backdrop of the Civil War, Keaton plays a down-on-his-luck train engineer whose love interest, played by Marion Mack, is kidnapped by the evil Union Army? Really? The Confederates are the good guys here? Huh. Well, either way, on his journey to rescue her, he and the bad guys get into a long train chase that takes up the bulk of the film. When this movie first came out, it was actually a failure, both critically and commercially. It wasn't until recent years that people started looking more closely at it and considered it Buster Keaton's best. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan. The movie takes itself a little too seriously for my taste, although it does have some pretty great stunt work. Honestly, I'd say just watch The Circus again. But I'm just stalling at this point. There's one movie in particular that we need to talk about when examining these 17 months in film. Let's look at The Jazz Singer. The Jazz Singer follows a young Jewish boy named Jakey Rabinowitz, played by Bobby Gordon. Or is it Jackie? I don't know, it's spelled Jakey, but the characters in the movie say Jackie. Either way, Jackie runs away from his stern father, the cantor, played by Warner Olin, when he tries to sing in jazz clubs instead of the synagogue. Years pass, and the boy, now played by Al Jolson, returns to New York as a successful jazz singer named Jack Robin to score the show of his dreams, even if it means having to reunite with his parents. When this movie came out, it was a big deal. Like, a really big deal. Not only was it revolutionizing the industry, and not only were producers and studio executives all taking a long, hard look to try to capitalize on it, but it also made so much money that, at the time, it was the highest grossing movie ever made. For those of you who don't know film terms, a gross is basically how much money a movie makes while in theaters. So why was it such a big deal? Why was it breaking records? Well, one big reason.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet.
The movie talks! This was completely unheard of at the time. This film ushered in the era of the talkies and was the first nail in the coffin of the silent film industry. If you've ever enjoyed a piece of dialogue or a famous line in a movie, then you owe it all to The Jazz Singer. Now, contrary to popular belief, The Jazz Singer technically isn't the first full-on talkie, as most of the film is still told in the silent movie format. You know how that works, right? where the story is told visually with some title cards in between to show what they're saying. Apparently, the art of recording sound on set was still incredibly difficult, and I'm going to assume expensive, so they could only record so much. But, to the filmmakers' credit, they're very smart about when and where they use it. While most of the movie is done the silent way, the sound comes on whenever Jack Robin is doing one of his song sequences, and then returns to silent when they're doing normal dialogue. Thus, you could make an argument for this actually being the first ever musical. This is very smart, as the whole movie is about how much he loves his singing, and letting the audience actually hear it gives it so much more life and helps it stand out. On top of that though, it's just a good movie. The conflict Jack has with his father is a great one, and it's very easy to identify with. And the Cantor is also great. He's not really a villain, he's just so set in his ways that you can tell that he wants to love his son, but because Jack doesn't fit in his narrow worldview, he can't bring himself to do it. And a lot of the side characters are also really good, and there's some nice moments of comic relief that are both funny and organic. Now, I do have to address the elephant in the room when it comes to this movie, or to be more accurate, when it comes to recommending this movie to people in our day and age. While the story is pretty timeless, one aspect of it is definitely very dated. Specifically, one of the shows that Jack gets hired to do happens to be a minstrel show, and in case you're wondering, yes, he puts on blackface. Yeah. Okay, I can't really call this a problem with the movie itself, since it did come out in 1928, and back in 1928 this wouldn't have raised any eyebrows. It's just something that might make modern viewers a little uncomfortable. So if you want to watch this movie, just prepare yourself for that part. Aside from that though, The Jazz Singer is still a great movie that has held up well throughout the years. So why didn't it win the Oscar then? I don't really know which one it would win, since it's a more human story, but the fact that it was the first movie to talk would probably qualify it for being outstanding, but that's beside the point. The Jazz Singer wasn't even nominated for either category. Or any category, in fact. Why did the Academy overlook this film so bad? Especially since it was what everyone else in Hollywood was looking at. Well, time for a history lesson. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences was originally founded to mediate labor disputes in Hollywood. It wasn't until a few years after its founding that they actually decided to start giving out awards. The Academy Awards ceremony was, in fact, founded by the president of the Academy at the time, Douglas Fairbanks, Sr., not Jr. Known as the King of Hollywood, Fairbanks was a silent star known for classic Hollywood roles such as Robin Hood and Zorro. Now, remember how I said that The Jazz Singer revolutionized the film industry and ushered in the era of talkies? While this was an amazing groundbreaker, at the same time, however, it ruined a lot of careers. Many actors found it very difficult to change their styles to fit the more subtle tones in talkies, and a lot of them had their careers ruined. And one of those actors was Douglas Fairbanks. Remember, the first Academy Awards didn't take place until 1929, a full year after the eligibility period. By this point, The Jazz Singer had already been out for a year. So, Fairbanks founded the Academy Awards for the specific purpose of fighting the talkies. They wanted to hand out the awards to silent films to prove that they were the better form of media that could tell better stories and that talkies were just a fad that would die out. So, the reason why The Jazz Singer wasn't nominated for any awards at the first Oscar ceremony was because the Oscars were founded to fight against The Jazz Singer. Granted, they did give it an honorary award, but that's really about it. So, remember in my previous video I asked the question of how far back the stereotype of the Academy choosing winners based on studio politics instead of what is the actual best movie goes? We're going to go down the list of them to figure out how far back into the past it was when they started making decisions that boggle the mind.
See, I did say that.
Well, I have the answer. All the way back to the very beginning. Again, I see why Wings got the award, and I understand the strife that Douglas Fairbanks must have been suffering. Watching your career slowly but surely go up in flames must have been pretty painful, and when you have the resources to host a lavish ceremony to try to prevent it, I would have done the same thing. Can't really blame the guy. And I wouldn't complain if this was just a one-off little tidbit, just something fun that happened in the history of Hollywood. But that's not what happened. The Academy Awards continued and prospered, and by the rules I established in the previous video, we must label this choice a pretty definitive snub. Wings has its place in cinematic history, but The Jazz Singer has a much, much bigger one.
from where I am. Just one bad day. You had a bad day once, am I right? Oh, I know I am. I can tell. You had a bad day and everything changed. Dressing up like a flying rat doesn't hide it, it screams it. You had a bad day and it drove you as crazy as everybody else, only you won't admit it.